Well, good morning. It's Friday, 16th of March 2018, and I was just about to say it's a beautiful morning down here in the southwest of England, and it started raining. Well, I'm sure that'll change, and unfortunately it's probably going to change to snow over the weekend, and it looks like much of the east of England and right down across to Dorset looks like it's in for a dump of snow over the weekend. Which of course is going to give the media another great opportunity to ramp up the fear porn on how we as a nation are dependent upon Russian gas. Now, yesterday evening I did an extended episode of Humanity versus Insanity with Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire, and we looked at the continued lack of evidence to support the assertion that Russia was in any way, shape or form involved in the Sergei Skripal incident in Salisbury. And funnily enough, the media today is still ramping the fear porn, despite the fact that yesterday Gavin Williamson, the Minister of Defence, who once he'd finished his paper round, he called everybody to Bristol to hear this seminal speech that he was going to give. And he demonstrated his grasp of statesmanship and lingua franca, the language of diplomacy, when he said that basically Russia should shut up and go away. Well, you know, this is, you know, a bit like the skinny kid in the playground. Trying to hide and saying, "Oh, shut up and go away." And I'm sure that Russia and Vladimir Putin is quaking in his boots. But, maybe there's a deeper agenda here. And by the way, before the usual suspects start screaming, rampant conspiracy theory, let's just make the observation that all we're asking for is evidence. Prima facie, irrefutable evidence. And the media seems content to just simply regurgitate the establishment narrative. Now, the media is supposed to be there as part of the check and balance, but it's not. It's a propaganda mouthpiece for the state. And if we just look at the headlines today in the Times, West unites to confront Russia over poisonings. The Metro, Putin the pariah. The Eye, West unites to escalate hostility with Russia. Now we'll come back to that. West unites to escalate hostility with Russia. The Independent, the West tells Russia enough is enough. The Express, rip World Cup out of Putin's grasp. The Scotsman, May in unity call following brazen spy attack. Now, unity call, that means that's usually a statement that says, actually we've got no evidence, but just believe us, just rally around us and take what we say for granted. The Daily Telegraph, nerve agent planted in daughter's suitcase. Really? Evidence, please? The Financial Times, leading NATO powers join forces to accuse Russia of Skripal attack. What has happened here? Has part of humanity lost its sense of justice? None of this would stand up in any court of law. It's simply being pumped out as a narrative. The Daily Mail takes the biscuit here. It wasn't a headline, but it's a banner across the front page. And it's a spoof. It says, Corbyn, his darkest hour. What if Jeremy Corbyn had been leader in 1940? And then a spoof quote. In the House, the Prime Minister said there was no evidence Herr Hitler was behind the Blitz, even though the planes had "Made in Germany" stamped on them. Now, that quote is attributed to the sketch writer and commentator Richard Littlejohn. But, again, it's disingenuous because there is nothing to link the attack in Salisbury with Russia. And, of course, Russia has actually stated categorically that didn't have any participation in it. And in fact, as we discussed last night, some of the UK's own chemical warfare experts have stated that Russia, there's no evidence that Russia had developed the Novichoks, the family of chemical weapons that were supposedly used here. And in fact, even Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, states that these things were not manufactured in Russia. They were actually manufactured in the countries that were part of the former Soviet Union, but not Russia. Now they're independent. And in fact, their chemical warfare facilities were handed over to the US. So, you know, something's not right here. The Sun can't be bothered to put out the crap anymore, apparently. So what does it do? It's got a headline of Toots and Royals, Harry Troops caught snorting cocaine in the pub. Well, there's probably more truth in that than any of the other headlines in any of the other media. The Guardian would appear to be the only British newspaper that is trying to have any sense of basic justice here. And it reports Corbyn defies critics to warn against rush to judgment. And that's really all anyone with any ounce of common sense would ask for. A rush to to avoid a rush to judgment pending the provision of actual evidence. You know, meanwhile, you've got the likes of sociopaths like the North Yorkshire MP Kevin Hollinsnake, who, you know, just proves over and over and over again that, you know, he's not there as a representative of his constituents. He's there to push the corporatist agenda, which is why he was shooed in there to replace the predecessor, Anne McIntosh. And he tweets, "What can we do about Russia? We could ban their gas imports and produce more of our own." He knows very, very well that Russia does not provide anything more than a very, very small fraction of gas to the UK. And even then, that's only based on the fact that some of the gas in the Belgian pipeline may have originated from Russia. But we're not buying gas specifically from Russia, although there are agreements in place between Centrica and Russia for the UK to take Russian gas, but to date, none of that has been imported into the UK, although 3 shipments apparently of liquid nitrogen gas have been imported. But it's not that significant. But, you know, the impact here, so the UK pulls the European nations together to put sanctions onto Russia, and those sanctions include the banning of gas supplies from Russia into the EU. Now, that's a really, really smart move if you want to destroy the European economy, because 40% of Germany's gas comes from Russia, and 20% of Italy's gas comes from Russia, and 18% of France's gas comes from Russia. So, you know, it's an average close on 30% of gas into the EU mainland comes from Russia. So, you know, could this be a ploy by elements within the deep establishment in the UK to actually have a serious negative impact on the EU economy? Is Theresa May or somebody looking to use it as a bargaining chip in terms of Brexit? Or the opposite? Is somebody going to use it as an opportunity to try and derail Brexit on the basis that, you know, if there's a threat to Russia, then obviously the EU has no military capacity to put up any meaningful military response to Russia. So therefore, could it be being used as a justification to get the British public to accept EU military unification? Which, of course, effectively means that Britain then, one way or another, is still part of the EU. Well, you know, either way, this is not a clear-cut situation. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the game players, you know, those who work to look at the way in which agendas can be manipulated to achieve longer-term goals, have modelled every possibility in this. So, you know, obviously, if gas sanctions are put on Russia, and 30% of European gas suddenly is not being delivered, where's it going to come from? Well, here's you got the likes of Kevin Hollinsnake and Ukug, who are literally salivating at the prospect of some kind of ongoing conflict with Russia, and using it as an opportunity to attempt to completely undermine the anti-fracking campaign in the UK, and say, well, if you're anti-fracking now, you must be anti-patriotic, because that Britain needs this gas to be able to not only survive itself, but also to provide to its European partners against the ogre of Vladimir Putin in Russia. This is just outrageous, all on the back of a statement, and the closest Theresa May has yet got to offering any hard evidence is simply suggesting that it is highly likely that Russia perpetrated this event. Now, as we discussed on Humanity versus Insanity last night, there are major commentators, major geopolitical analysts who are looking at the lack of evidence and basically calling it for what it is. This is, we might as well be in summer of 1914 or late summer of 1939 here, as the media pushes the public into a unquestioning support for getting into some global conflagration. And we know, because we've read the scripts, that there are socio-psychopathic elements hiding behind governments who are desperate to push the world into a major global conflict. They're behind schedule in many, many respects. And as I said yesterday, Zbigniew Brzezinski stated nearly a decade ago that the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. Well, it's never been more important to take an interest in what's going on. Your government would much rather you just read the newspaper, sat on the train on the way to work and going, oh my God, that's terrible. That's terrible. What are we going to do about those nasty Russians? And leave them to do whatever it is they want, and condemn you to potentially living in a sacrifice zone because, for whatever reason, Russia decides to retaliate. Or we simply have this economic standoff where there's a refusal to trade with Russia, and 60% of the UK then could be potentially targeted for the exploitation of unconventional gas. And of course, the British government right now is working through the machinations, just as I said it would 5 years ago when I was doing the Fractured Future tour. It was going through the machinations to take all planning decisions regarding unconventional gas exploitation away from local communities, away from local authorities, and put it back into central government, where it becomes a major infrastructure decision. And basically, to hell with what anybody thinks, we're just going to crack on and do it. So, I'm not asking you to, for one moment, simply condemn Russia or condemn the British government here, but somebody isn't telling the truth, and all we're asking for is evidence. And if you don't get evidence, then you're effectively prostituting your own intellectual integrity, because your government has worked very, very hard to shut down your capacity for independent thought. And what it has tried to create is a generation of unthinking, unquestioning economic debt slaves. And sadly, a significant chunk of the population does fall into that category. But they're never going to make a difference. They're just going to carry on doing what they do. They're not going to get involved one way or the other. So this is essentially an opportunity for people to stand up and make it clear that they are not dumbed down. They are not an unthinking, unquestioning, robotic debt slave. That they can still take an interest, and they can realise Zbigniew Brzezinski's worst fears by demonstrating that they are politically awakened and not prepared to simply be taken in to a potentially disastrous conflict, whether that be economic or military, on the back of an allegation that it's simply highly likely that the other party was involved. So last night I took the decision not to do an episode of Fracking Nightmare, and I think I may put Fracking Nightmare to rest now on the basis that I'm going to continue to do these morning live streams. But what that gives me an opportunity to do is more in-depth discussions on humanity versus insanity. And last night's discussion, this 90-minute discussion with Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire, we really do drill down, no pun intended, into the lies and the deceit, the obfuscation and the omissions surrounding this incident in Salisbury. So once again, all I'm asking is that you do your own research. And if you're watching this and you're based in Germany or France or Italy, then it's really important that you also get involved, because although France does appear to have stepped away from the party line, and in fact just last night one of the French government spokesmen basically said, you know, we do need to step back from making accusations until such time as we see hard evidence. So although it's being reported in the British media that France and Germany and the US are right behind Britain's allegation here, privately they want to see more evidence. And all this, of course, on the back of the rising awareness of the global water crisis, which certainly isn't aided by Nestle buying up large chunks of the world's fresh water, only to sell it back to us at outrageous profit. But yesterday, on CBS, there was a statement that said world leaders sound alarm over global water crisis. And Jim Yong Kim, the World Bank president, said the ecosystems on which life itself is based, our food security, energy sustainability, public health, jobs, cities, are all at risk because of how water is managed. And add that to how our political leaders are being manipulated by the global corporatists, and maybe, just maybe, people will start to realise that unless they do step up to the plate, unless they do start taking an interest in what's occurring, then sadly, the legacy that we leave for future generations just doesn't bear thinking about. Meanwhile, wrap up warm for the weekend. The sun's come out again briefly. Wrap up warm for the weekend. We're going to continue with the clean-up at Kirby Misperton next week. I think it's going to be a case of hunker down over this weekend. But once the snow has cleared, we'll be returning to Kirby Misperton to hopefully wrap up the cleaning up process of the camp there. So, you know, that is an indication. Kirby Misperton is a classic indication. It's a microcosm of what can be achieved when communities come together. Now we have to take that from the microcosm and take it into the macrocosm and demonstrate that the British people and the people of the world are not going to be manipulated by global socio-psychopaths. You have a great weekend, and I'll catch you on Monday morning.